The Doll That Cries Blood. A girl receives an antique doll from a street bazaar. Every night, she finds the doll in different places around the house, and its eyes start to cry blood. When she tries to get rid of it, terrible things begin to happen to her family. I was excited as I walked through the stalls of the street bazaar. The sun shone high, and the smell of popcorn and sweets lingered in the air, mixed with the sound of laughter and animated conversations. It was a perfect day for exploring, and I was determined to find something special. I had always loved these fairs. They had a way of hiding treasures around every corner. But on that day, I didn't expect that the treasure I would find would change everything. That's when I saw the doll. It was on a small table, surrounded by other antique items, but nothing caught my attention like she did. Her porcelain skin was flawless, and her blue eyes seemed to shine with their own intensity. The dress, made from delicate fabric faded by time, had lace details that seemed to tell stories from a distant past. I approached, fascinated, and felt her pull at my soul, as if she were calling to me. "You're beautiful," I murmured, touching her cold face. A wave of emotion washed over me, and I couldn't understand why a simple doll had this effect on me. It was as if we were connected somehow, as if I were destined to find her. The seller, a middle-aged man with a kind smile, noticed my enchantment and said, "She has a story, you know." "A story?" I asked, curious. "Yes. She belonged to a girl named Lila, who disappeared a long time ago. They say the doll holds secrets and sometimes can even move on its own," the seller replied, winking at me. A shiver ran down my spine, but curiosity was stronger. "I want to take her home," I declared without hesitation. The seller smiled, and after a brief moment, handed me the doll. The price was negligible, and I couldn't believe I had gotten something so magnificent for so little. When I got home, my mother was in the kitchen, organizing some things. She was always busy, but I knew this moment was special. As soon as I walked in, I couldn't contain my excitement. "Mom, look what I found at the bazaar." She turned, and a smile formed on her lips as she saw the doll. But, to my surprise, her expression quickly turned uneasy. She looked at the doll, and for a moment, her face hardened. "Chloe, where did you buy this?" Her voice had a tone I had never heard before, a mix of concern and something deeper. "It was at a street bazaar." "Isn't she beautiful? Look at the dress. And those eyes," I said, trying to ignore the change in her face. But my mother's unease left me feeling a bit anxious. "Don't you like her?" "It's not that, dear. It's just, sometimes it's better not to get attached to things that have very old stories," she replied, looking away. "But Mom, she's just a doll. And I feel like she's special." I wanted her to be as excited as I was. "Can I put her in my room?" "All right, but take care of her, Chloe. I don't want you playing with something that could bring back bad memories," my mother said, still with a shadow of concern in her eyes. The mood in the house seemed to change, but I ignored it. I couldn't let her look ruin the happiness I felt. I took the doll to my room, arranging a special shelf for her near the window. I looked at her face again, and something inside me felt warm. It was as if she were smiling back at me. That night, as I prepared for bed, the doll was there, looking at me with her blue eyes. The moonlight streamed through the window, making her seem almost magical. I couldn't resist a feeling of safety. It was as if she were protecting me in some way. But as I closed my eyes, a strange sensation began to envelop me. It was a feeling that I wasn't alone. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a soft whisper, as if someone were calling my name. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I looked around, and everything seemed normal, except for the doll. She was standing next to my bed, as if she had moved on her own. My heart raced, and I wondered if I had dreamed. But it wasn't a dream, the doll was there, standing, with that penetrating gaze. "This is impossible," I murmured to myself, trying to convince myself it was just an illusion. But my body was paralyzed by a mix of fear and curiosity. How had she moved? I couldn't take my eyes off her. The moonlight illuminated her face, and a chill ran down my spine. I slowly got up, trying not to make any noise, but the doll seemed to be watching me. You moved?" I asked, as if I expected her to answer. Of course, she wouldn't, but the need to understand the situation forced me to speak. The doll remained undisturbed, and the atmosphere in my room felt heavy with an unusual weight. I decided I needed to see her up close. As I approached, I felt the scent of old wood, almost as if the doll had her own story to tell. When I reached out to touch her, a shiver coursed through my body, and for a moment, I almost expected her to return the touch. But there was nothing but the coldness of porcelain. "You're just a doll," I declared, fighting against the fear that was beginning to settle in me. But as I returned to bed, a doubt tormented me. What if she really had something to do with that girl named Lila? What did my mom mean with her words about old things? I didn't understand, but there was something about the doll that felt beyond me. The truth is, that night, I couldn't sleep. I looked at the doll, which now seemed a little less innocent than before. The whisper I had heard hadn't been a product of my imagination. There was a connection between us, and I didn't know if it was something good or bad. At dawn, the sunlight streamed through the window, dispelling the shadows of the night, but a part of me was still trapped in the mystery of that doll. When I finally managed to fall asleep, I had no idea that my life was about to change forever. The next day brought a new reality, one I wasn't ready to face. The doll was about to become a part of me, and whatever was behind her ancient story would begin to unfold before my eyes. The moon was high in the sky when I got home, the porcelain doll carefully wrapped in a soft cloth in my arms. The feeling of connection I had sensed at the street bazaar still pulsed in my heart, as if that little figure were alive. But as I approached the door, an unease began to settle in my chest. What was so special about this doll? As soon as I entered, my mother was in the living room, her face illuminated only by the soft light of the lamp. She looked at me and smiled, but there was something in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. It was a mix of joy and concern. "Hi, Chloe. What did you bring?" she asked, trying to hide her apprehension. "Look. I found this doll at the bazaar," I replied, carefully unwrapping the cloth. The doll was flawless, with golden hair and a lace dress that seemed to have crossed generations. "She's beautiful, dear," my mother said, forcing a smile. But soon her gaze drifted away, as if something was bothering her. "Where did you find her again?" "Over at the bazaar, you know. The one that happens once a month in the square," I said, looking at the doll as if I expected her to say something. "I feel like she's special." "Special, yes," my mother murmured, but her voice carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "Let's put her in a nice place, then." That night, after my mother wished me good night, I lay in bed, the doll carefully positioned on the shelf in front of me. The silence of the house was deep, but I couldn't relax. What was that strange feeling? It was as if the doll were watching me, waiting for something from me. As the hours passed, the darkness grew denser. Hashtag. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard a soft whisper. It was so low that I thought it might have just been the wind, but then a chill ran down my spine. I opened my eyes quickly, and there it was, the doll, standing beside my bed, as if it had moved on its own. "No, this can't be happening," I murmured to myself, trying to ignore what I saw. I gripped the blanket tightly, my eyes fixed on the doll. It was just my imagination, I told myself, but the image of the doll standing there, with its delicate features and opaque eyes, wouldn't leave my mind. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. The sun was streaming through the window, but I didn't feel rested. As I got up, I noticed that the doll was back on the shelf, but strangely, its dress was a bit crumpled, as if it had been moved. This is impossible, I thought, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe I had just dreamed it, but the idea that the doll could have moved still lingered in the air. In the days that followed, the situation only worsened. Each morning, I found the doll in a different place, sometimes on the table, other times in the chair, and even in the bathroom once. What was happening? I decided not to tell my mother about it. She already seemed worried about other things. There was something in her gaze that made me uneasy, and I didn't want to burden her with my own worries. One night, on the brink of despair, I decided to confront the doll. I looked deep into its porcelain eyes and said loudly, "You need to stop moving. This is creepy." But instead of feeling better, a sense of panic began to grow inside me. What was wrong with it? Why did I feel so connected to something that seemed so sinister? That same night, while trying to sleep, restlessness took over me. It was then that I heard the whisper again. This time, it was louder, almost like a call. I got out of bed, my heart racing, and went over to the doll. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. The silence that followed was deafening. I was alone, but at the same time, I felt as if I wasn't. Then I saw it. A tear of blood was rolling down the doll's face. I shuddered and recoiled, my mouth dry with terror. "No, no, no," I whispered, unable to believe what I was seeing. What did this mean? What was happening? The doll, which had once seemed so pretty, was now an image of horror. Desperate, I went back to my room and sat on the cold floor. This can't be real. It must be some kind of nightmare, I told myself. But the truth was that I no longer knew what to think. The connection I had initially felt was transforming into something far darker. "Chloe," my mother shouted from downstairs, interrupting my thoughts. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, Mom. I'm just trying to sleep," I replied, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. What should I do? How could I explain to her that a doll was crying blood in my room? After a while, exhaustion began to take over, and I eventually fell asleep, but the dream was dark. I saw the doll moving, leaving the spot where I had left it and approaching me. The whisper turned into a scream, and I woke up with my heart racing. I looked at the clock, 3 a.m. An eerie and silent hour, but I couldn't go back to sleep. The next day, my mother seemed more tired than usual. I watched her as she drank her coffee, her eyes heavy with dark circles. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked, concerned. "Yeah, sweetie. I just didn't sleep very well," she admitted, rubbing her eyes. "You know how it is, sometimes. Is it the doll you brought home, isn't it?" I asked hesitantly. "You don't seem very happy about it." She hesitated before answering. "I just have a feeling. Something doesn't seem right with her. But don't worry, Chloe. She's just a doll." I went to school with a knot in my stomach. What was happening? I felt that everything was interconnected, but I couldn't put my finger on it. What did the doll really want from me? The whisper and the blood tears were becoming part of my reality, and I didn't know how to escape. That night, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and went to my room, determined to uncover the truth about the doll. I stared at it, now sitting on the shelf, its gaze fixed on me. "If you're really here, tell me what you want," I said, my voice firm. Nothing happened. The silence was oppressive, and for a moment, I thought I might have imagined everything. But then, a cold sensation swept through the room, and I saw the blood tears starting to slide down again. My heart raced, and in a moment of desperation, I felt I needed to understand what was happening. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "What do you want?" But the doll remained silent. I looked at it, and in that instant, I realized that I needed to take action. I couldn't keep living with this fear, with this uncertainty. Something had to be done, and I was determined to uncover the truth. I didn't know how, but I knew the answer was right there in front of me. And even with the terror I was feeling, a part of me was intrigued, eager to unravel the mystery that the doll carried with him. It was time to face this situation, no matter the cost. That day at the library changed everything. Jake and I decided to meet there, a place that had always been our refuge. The smell of old books, the reverent silence that permeated the space, and the warm yellow lights of the lamps gave us a sense of safety, but the atmosphere was charged with mystery. As soon as I entered, I was greeted by the familiar jingle of the bells, announcing my arrival in the sacred space of knowledge. "Hey, Chloe!" Jake waved to me from across the room, surrounded by a pile of books. His light brown hair was messy, and he was wearing a t-shirt from my favorite movie. "Did you bring the doll?" "Of course, it's in my backpack," I replied, trying to hide the apprehension in my voice. The porcelain doll, which had become part of my daily life, felt more like a burden than a companion. "But I'm not sure if it's a good idea. We need to understand what's going on. These strange things are only increasing," Jake insisted, looking at me with an intensity that made me feel he was willing to face anything. "Do you really believe the doll could be connected to this?" I asked, hesitating. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we have to try." I descended the creaky wooden stairs and headed to where the books on history and folklore were displayed. The library was old and full of secrets, and part of me hoped we would find something that could give us answers. After a while of searching, Jake and I found a dusty book with a worn leather cover. The title was almost illegible, but the pages seemed intact. "Look at this," Jake said, opening the book. "It's about local legends." He began to flip through the pages until an illustration caught his attention. "Look! It's a doll. And, wait, there's a name here. What is it?" I asked, leaning in to see better. "Lila," he replied, his eyes widening. "It says here that Lila disappeared a century ago under mysterious circumstances. And her doll was exactly like yours." My heart raced. "You're kidding, right? This can't be a coincidence." "It doesn't seem to be, Chloe. Look, there's more here." Jake turned the page and read aloud, "The girl was last seen on a stormy night. It is said that she was taken by an unknown force, and the doll, made to protect her, became the symbol of her curse." Her curse. The word echoed in my mind, sending a chill down my spine. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Jake replied, rubbing the back of his neck, nervous. "But we need to find out more about Lila and this doll. It could be the key to understanding what's happening." "Let's look for more information about her family," I suggested, feeling excited by the idea of a mystery to solve. At the same time, a sense of unease was growing inside me. #####. I didn't want to know what the doll represented, but curiosity was stronger. We continued our research, diving into old books and newspaper records. Each page we turned seemed to take us deeper into Lila's story, and with that, the strange events began to make more sense. We discovered that the girl was known in the town for her kindness and her love for animals. But there was a dark side to her story. Lila's grandmother had been accused of witchcraft, and the family faced the community's disdain because of it. "This is horrible," I murmured, running my fingers over an illustration of a storm. "No one deserves that." "Yeah, and it seems the doll was tied to all of this. It was like it was an amulet, but also a symbol of the fear that the family carried," Jake commented, looking at me with a serious expression. "Do you think the doll is trying to communicate with us? Or that Lila needs help?" I asked, feeling the weight of the words. "Maybe," Jake said thoughtfully. "But we need to be careful. If there's really a curse, we don't know what the consequences might be." The conversation fell into silence, and I got lost in my thoughts. What would it take to break this curse? And, more importantly, what exactly had happened to Lila? "Chloe, look at this!" Jake exclaimed, breaking the silence. He had found a passage that spoke of a ceremony that could be performed to help free Lila's soul. "It says here that if someone can understand her pain, they might be able to break the curse. But that means I would need to face what happened to her, right? I couldn't believe I was considering this possibility. Yes, but you don't have to do it alone. I'll be with you, Jake assured me, placing his hand on my shoulder. I felt a wave of comfort at hearing that, but the uncertainty still consumed me. As we continued to explore more about Lila, I began to realize that everything was connected. Her story seemed to reflect fears and traumas that my own family had carried for generations. Suddenly, the doll was no longer just a decorative piece but a symbol of something much larger, a link between the past and the present. Jake, do you think the doll might be trying to warn us about something? I asked, my voice trembling. I don't know, but I think we need to find out. Lila might be trapped in this cycle, just like her family. And if the doll is the key to freeing her, we have to do something, he replied, determination in his voice. So, what do we do now? I asked, a mix of fear and determination growing inside me. Let's go back to your house and see if we can find anything else. The doll might give us more clues, Jake suggested. You're right. We can't just leave it like this, I agreed, feeling that we were finally on the right path. As we left the library, the sun was setting, casting a golden light over the town. The feeling that time was running out increased with each step. The doll, which had once seemed like a burden, was now the key to something much bigger. And as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were just beginning to scratch the surface of a mystery that had remained hidden for too long. Let's uncover the truth, Chloe, Jake said, looking at me with determination. We won't let fear win. No, we won't, I affirmed, feeling courage swell within me. Lila's story and whatever was connected to the doll were now a part of me, and I was determined to discover what that meant. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, creating a play of shadows and light in the room where I was. The day had started like any other, but the presence of the porcelain doll, with its empty and enigmatic gaze, lingered in my mind. While I tried to focus on my daily tasks, the image of the doll continued to infiltrate my thoughts, like a shadow that wouldn't let me rest. It was then, while I was washing the dishes, that I heard hushed voices coming from my mother's bedroom. Curious, I set the sponge down and made my way to the slightly open door. I listened to the conversation, trying to catch every word. She can't know, not yet, my mother said, her voice trembling slightly. Grandma made a pact, and that could cost us everything. My heart raced. What was my mother talking about? A pact? What did that mean? The unease I felt about the doll transformed into something much deeper. I needed to know more, but I didn't want to interrupt what seemed to be such a delicate conversation. I decided to wait a moment, but my curiosity was too great to contain. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, doing my best to appear casual. Hi, Mom, what are you two talking about? My mother's friend, who was sitting next to her, looked at me with an expression that mixed concern and surprise. My mother quickly hid her face in her hands, as if trying to organize her thoughts. Chloe, dear, she began, her voice still trembling. We were just talking about old family stories. You know how that can be. She tried to smile, but I could see it wasn't a genuine one. The tension in the air was palpable. Family stories? I pressed, unwilling to let the topic slip away. What kind of stories? You mentioned a pact, what does that mean? My mother's friend looked at my mother as if waiting for her to take the lead. When my mother didn't respond, the woman said, Look, Chloe, some things are better left in the past. Your grandmother, she made difficult choices to protect the family. Some of them might have consequences that you don't understand right now. Consequences? I frowned, confused. Like what? Is it related to the doll I brought home? My mother finally looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness. Yes, dear. The doll, it belonged to a girl named Lila, who disappeared long ago. Your grandmother made a pact to protect the family from any harm that could come from that disappearance. But what does that have to do with the doll? Anger and frustration began to flow through me. Why couldn't she just throw it away? If all this is true, then why haven't you done anything about it? Chloe, it's not that simple, my mother sighed, her eyes welling with tears. The doll is like a guardian, but it's also a reminder of what happened. If we break the pact, there could be terrible consequences. Consequences? Like what? I asked, my voice rising. Mom, you're scaring me. What are you really saying? My mother's friend stood up, placing a hand on my shoulder. Chloe, I understand that this is hard to accept, but your family's story is filled with secrets. The pact your grandmother made wasn't just to protect you, it was also to keep something trapped. My mind spun with these new revelations. I had to know more. What happened to Lila? Why did she disappear? What does the doll have to do with this? She disappeared on a stormy day, my mother began, her voice now softer. The legend says she was playing with the doll when the clouds rolled in. The last place she was seen was in the clearing of the forest where the doll was made. They say she became part of the doll, a spirit trapped between two worlds. So, if the doll is Lila, does that mean she's trapped here because of Grandma's pact? I murmured, trying to piece it all together. But why is she crying? Why is she moving? I don't know, Chloe, my mother said, her gaze distant. But I know the doll is part of our past, and now that you've brought it home, whatever was sealed by your grandmother is back. A wave of despair hit me. But I don't want this. I don't want the doll to bring more pain to us. Mom, we need to get rid of it. It's not that simple, my mother repeated, her voice now firmer. If the pact is broken carelessly, it could release something we can't control. You can't just throw it away and expect everything to be fine. So, what should we do? Hashtag, I asked, feeling the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. How can we help Lila? Maybe, just maybe, the answer lies in learning more about the history, my mother's friend suggested. If you can understand what happened in the past, perhaps you can find a way to help. I looked at my mother, who seemed lost in her thoughts. She hesitated but finally nodded. You can study the history of the doll and Lila. But, Chloe, be careful. Some truths are better left buried. With a lump in my throat, I agreed. The feeling that I was about to dive into something much larger and more complicated than I could imagine enveloped me, but I knew I had to do it. The doll and what it represented could not continue to haunt us this way. I needed to understand what had happened so that I could find a way to help not just Lila, but my family as well. The conversation slowly drifted away from the dark topic, and my mother and her friend tried to shift the focus, but I couldn't shake the doll from my mind. When I finally left, the weight of what I had discovered felt like it was following me like a shadow. It was clear that the doll was not just a decorative piece, but an intrinsic part of my family's history, and I was determined to uncover everything I could about it. That night, with the information fresh in my mind, I went to the local library. The atmosphere of the place was heavy and silent, almost as if the shelves were guarding secrets. I knew I needed to find any details about Lila and the pact my grandmother had made. I spent hours sifting through books and old documents, each page I turned seemed to raise more questions than answers. While browsing a dusty book on local legends, I found a reference to a girl named Lila who had a doll. The text spoke of the connection between the doll and the girl's disappearance, mentioning that she was last seen in a clearing in the woods. The words seemed to leap off the page, each carrying a weight of mystery and fear. This is what I need, I whispered to myself, feeling a growing determination. I had to understand what happened to Lila and how it related to the doll that was now in my home. What else could I discover? And what did the pact my grandmother had made really mean? These questions echoed in my mind as I continued my research, determined to unravel every mystery the doll held within. The sunlight filtered through the leaves of the trees as Jake and I walked toward the nursing home where my grandmother lived. The air was charged with a mix of anxiety and hope. Ever since we found the connection between the porcelain doll and Lila's disappearance, I knew that the only way to fully understand what was happening was to talk to my grandmother. She was the only one who could give us answers about the dark pact her mother had mentioned. "Are you ready for this?" Jake asked, breaking the silence that accompanied us. His voice was soft, but there was a concern in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. "I don't know," I replied, running my hand through my hair nervously. "It's strange to think my family has such a heavy secret. What if she doesn't want to talk about it?" "She might want to protect you," Jake suggested, placing his hand on my shoulder. "But this is important. We need to know what's going on." I nodded, though a part of me wanted to turn back and forget all of this. The doll, its blood tears, my mother's nightmares, it was all too terrifying. But there was no way to ignore the situation. It was as if we were trapped in a web woven by generations, and I was the only one who could untangle it. As we arrived at the nursing home, the characteristic smell of disinfectant and artificial flowers enveloped us. The place was quiet, with residents sitting in wheelchairs or on benches, some looking out the window and others whispering softly to each other. The atmosphere was thick with untold stories and forgotten memories. "Let's go," Jake said, gently pulling me toward the corridor where my grandmother was. My heart raced, and I found myself wondering if she still remembered me. Since my mother had placed her in a home, we hadn't visited as often as we should have. "Hi, dear." My grandmother's voice was like a breath of fresh air on a hot day. She was sitting in a rocking chair by the window, her gray hair pinned up casually. Her smile lit up the room, but seeing Jake by my side made her expression turn cautious. "Hi, Grandma. How are you?" I asked, trying to hide my apprehension. "I'm well, very well," she replied, though her voice didn't quite convey the same certainty. "And who is this young man?" "This is Jake, my friend," I introduced, a bit nervously. "We're here because we need to talk to you about the doll I found." Instantly, my grandmother's expression changed. Her eyes, which had once sparkled with joy, were now dark and filled with a fear I couldn't comprehend. "The doll, you shouldn't have brought it home, Chloe." "Why not?" I asked, a rising sense of panic forming in my stomach. "What's going on with it? Why are you so scared?" Jake and I exchanged glances, the tension building between us. I needed to know, and I was willing to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. My grandmother took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into an abyss. "The doll belonged to a girl named Lila, and I also knew this story. The doll is a symbol of protection, but it's also tied to a pact my mother made. A protection that became a curse." "What kind of pact?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you mean by curse?" "When you bring something back from the past, you must be careful, Chloe. Sometimes, things are not as they seem," she said, looking out the window as if she were waiting for the answers to be whispered by the wind. "But what happened to Lila? Why did she disappear?" I pressed, unable to contain my curiosity. "We need to understand all of this." My grandmother hesitated, her eyes drifting to the ground, as if the memories were a burden too heavy to bear. Lila was a lively girl, but her family was involved in something dark. The pact my mother made was to protect her, but it also brought terrible consequences. "Consequences like what?" Jake interjected, his voice firm yet gentle. She looked at us, her eyes now seeming older than ever. "The doll was made to guard Lila's soul, as a way to protect her. But it also trapped her, and if anyone in the family dares to disregard the pact, the curse manifests. It can affect not just you, but everyone around you. So, what should we do?" I asked, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "How can we break this?" "The only way to reverse the curse is to confront the past," she replied, her gaze becoming distant. You must go to where it all began, where Lila disappeared, and confront what is trapped in the doll. But be aware, it won't be easy. Fear is what keeps the curse alive. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Fear was something my family had always carried, and I now realized it was a burden I had inherited as well. And if I fail? What if the doll doesn't let me go? Sometimes, you need to sacrifice something to free other souls, my grandmother said, her words echoing in my mind as I tried to process everything. You must be prepared to face what's inside you. Jake placed his hand on my shoulder, trying to comfort me. We'll do this together, he said. No matter what happens. Thank you, I said, a mix of gratitude and fear swelling within me. Whatever was tied to the doll was not just about Lila, but about me, my family, and the curse that had haunted us for generations. I will help you, my grandmother said, her gaze now more determined. But you need to be strong, Chloe. The truth can be painful. ###, I'm ready, I replied, determined to uncover what was hidden in the shadows of the past. I knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but I couldn't let fear stop me. It was time to confront the truth and free Lila's soul, no matter the cost. In that moment, as we spoke, the connection between the three of us felt stronger than ever. I felt that I wasn't alone in this fight. I had a friend and a grandmother willing to fight for the truth by my side. The curse might have kept us prisoners for so long, but now it was time to break those chains and finally discover what had really happened to Lila. Let's go, Chloe, Jake said, gently pulling me away from the window. We have a lot to research, and we need to prepare. Yes, let's, I agreed, feeling a new sense of determination bloom in my chest. As I left the nursing home, a new mission formed in my mind. There was no turning back. It was time to face the past and perhaps find the freedom that my family and I so desperately needed. The night was silent, but there was something in the air that made me uneasy. As soon as I entered my house, I felt a chill run down my spine. The light in the living room illuminated the corner where the porcelain doll sat, seeming to watch me with its empty, enigmatic eyes. It was as if it was aware of everything happening around us. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but I knew something was wrong. Chloe, are you okay? My mom asked, watching me with a concerned look. She was sitting on the couch, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The warmth of the drink contrasted with the cold I felt inside. I'm fine, just thinking about the doll, I replied hesitantly. Her smile faded quickly, and I realized the unease I felt wasn't just mine. She's interesting, my mom said, her voice trembling. But maybe it's best to leave her where she is. Why do you say that? I asked, trying to understand her aversion to the doll. She's just a doll. Sometimes, things aren't what they seem, Chloe, she replied, staring intently at the doll. Her gaze was distant, as if she saw something I couldn't. I decided to ignore the conversation and went to my room. The bed welcomed me, and I was exhausted. But even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was watching me. When I turned off the light, the room plunged into a dense, oppressive darkness. I closed my eyes, trying to relax, but the silence was broken by a soft whisper. It was as if someone were calling my name. Chloe, the voice was ethereal, almost like an echo. I jolted awake, momentarily thinking I was dreaming. But when I opened my eyes, I saw the doll standing beside my bed. My heart raced. What are you doing here? I murmured, but the doll didn't respond. It remained motionless, that carved smile on its face as if it were enjoying my fear. I tried to disregard what I saw and turned to the other side. Sleep, however, wouldn't come. I spent the night awake, hearing the sounds of the house and being tormented by the feeling that the doll was always present. When the sun rose, I was exhausted, and when I looked to the side, the doll was back on its shelf, as if nothing had happened. Chloe, are you okay? My mom asked during breakfast. She noticed my tired look and how I hesitated to glance at the doll. I'm fine, just didn't sleep well, I replied, trying to sound casual. But the truth was that the doll bothered me more with each passing day. In the days that followed, the situation only worsened. I woke up every morning to find the doll in a different spot. One morning, she was sitting on the bedside table, another, she was in the bathroom. I had no idea how this was happening. "Mom, are you playing a joke on me?" I asked one morning, desperate. "Chloe, I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her gaze drifting to the doll. I didn't move her. I tried to ignore the changes, but I couldn't. My mom started having nightmares and would wake up screaming. That night, I heard her whispering something in her sleep, "No, Lila, don't do that." My heart sank. It was as if the doll was entangling our entire family in its dark web. "You need to see a doctor, Mom," I suggested, worried. "Those nightmares seem really intense." "No, Chloe, I'm fine. It's just a rough patch," she replied, but her voice was filled with concern. Things took an even more sinister turn when, one particularly distressing night, I found blood tears streaming from the doll's eyes. I was paralyzed, the sight leaving me speechless. The horror I felt was palpable. "Why are you crying?" I asked, but, of course, there was no answer. The doll simply stared at me, its red tears forming small puddles on the floor. I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to investigate the origin of that cursed doll. The next day, I decided to talk to Jake, my best friend. He was always the type to believe in supernatural things, and I knew he could help me. "Jake, you won't believe what's been happening," I started, anxious. "Chloe, you look pale." "What's wrong?" he asked, concerned. "It's the doll I bought at the bazaar. Strange things are happening, and I need your help to find out more about her," I explained, trying not to sound hysterical. "Let's do it. Tell me everything," Jake said, determined. "She moves on her own, and my mom is having nightmares. And now she cried blood. We need to find out where she came from," I said, urgency tinging my voice. Jake nodded. "Let's go to the library. We might find something in the old books." We went to the local library, a place that had always seemed full of mysteries to me. The shelves were packed with dusty books, and the smell of old paper filled the air. "Here, you might find something," Jake said, pointing to an ancient book that caught his attention. We flipped through the pages until we found a mention of a girl named Lila. "Look at this!" Jake exclaimed. "She disappeared a century ago and had a doll just like yours." "You're kidding!" I almost shouted. "We need to know more about her. What happened?" Jake began to read aloud, and the tragic story unfolded. Lila had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and rumors said that the doll she owned had been cursed. My heart raced. I had to know more. "We need to find more information about this Lila," I said, determined. But before we could continue our research, I heard a familiar whisper, and a chill ran down my spine. The voice seemed to get closer, and I didn't know if I was dreaming or if the doll really had something to do with all this. We returned home, but the atmosphere was heavy. The silence was deafening, and the sense that something was about to happen was palpable. As soon as I entered my room, I felt the doll watching me. She was there, in her usual spot, but something was different about her posture. "You can't keep following me," I yelled, but no one was there to hear. The echo of my own voice seemed to mock me. That night, the situation escalated. I was lying in bed when I heard a noise coming from the living room. I slowly got up, my heart racing. "Mom." I called, but received no answer. The house was silent, but a feeling that something was wrong enveloped me. When I entered the living room, the scene was breathtaking. The doll stood in the center of the room, and around her, objects began to fly. A vase that had been on the table shattered on the floor, and my mom, with wide eyes, fainted in a corner. "Mom!" I screamed, running to her. But as I held her, the house seemed to come alive, with screams echoing and lights flickering. Terror consumed me, and the only thing I could think of was the doll at the center of that chaos. That night would change everything. I knew I had to do something, but what? The doll, which had once seemed merely a curiosity, was now the center of a mystery that consumed me, and I needed to uncover the truth. I didn't know what awaited me, but the only certainty I had was that the connection with Lila and what the doll represented could not be ignored. Jake's words echoed in my mind, sometimes, things aren't what they seem. And I was about to discover the truth behind that doll and the pact that had been made. The atmosphere was heavy when Jake and I decided that the ritual was our only option. The day had darkened quickly, as if nature itself recognized the gravity of our situation. Shadows seemed to stretch, making the forest even more intimidating. The wind whispered through the trees, as if trying to warn us about what we were about to do. I glanced at Jake, who wore a determined expression, but his eyes betrayed a certain fear. "Are you sure this will work?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "We have no other choice, Chloe. We need to free Lila and put an end to this once and for all." He adjusted the backpack, where we had placed the ancient book and the items needed for the ritual. The forest was silent, except for the sound of our breathing and the occasional snap of twigs beneath our feet. The path we chose was narrow and covered with dry leaves, making each step feel like a greater effort than it actually was. With every step, fear grew within me, but I knew I had to be brave. It wasn't just for me, it was for my mother and for Lila. Finally, we found a small clearing, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the treetops. The place had a strange energy, as if the very ground was aware of our presence. Jake set the backpack on the ground and began to take out the items. "Let's make this quick," he said, trying to sound confident. "We need to draw the circle and light the candles." As he moved, I looked around, feeling an invisible presence watching us. It was as if the forest was alive, and the tension in the air grew stronger. Shadows danced around us, becoming denser, and a sense of urgency washed over me. "Do you think the doll will really appear?" I asked, trying to break the tense silence. "If the ritual works, yes." Jake replied, focused on tracing lines in the dirt. "But we need to be careful. If something goes wrong..." The thought that something could go wrong made my stomach twist. I had to believe that we were doing the right thing. Lila needed us. I quickly prayed to any force that might be listening, asking for protection and clarity. "Ready," Jake announced, stepping back from the circle he had drawn. He lit the candles we had placed at each point of the circle, and as the yellowish light spread, the forest seemed to come alive. The shadows began to dance more intensely, as if responding to our call. "Now we need to recite the words of the ritual." Jake picked up the book and opened it to the marked page. "Are you ready?" "Yes, let's do it." My voice came out stronger than I expected, but the confidence was merely a facade. I needed to believe. Jake started to read aloud, his words echoing through the clearing. The text was ancient, filled with terms I could barely understand, but with each syllable he pronounced, the atmosphere around us seemed to change. The temperature dropped, and a cold breeze swept past us, causing the candle flames to flicker. "Chloe, do you feel that?" Jake asked, pausing his reading for a moment. "Yes, it's like..." The air was charged with energy, and I could feel a presence approaching. "It's like someone is here with us. Let's continue." He looked back at the book, and I followed suit, trying to focus on the words coming from his mouth. The connection between us and the doll was becoming stronger. As we progressed, a sense of despair began to seep into me. What were we about to awaken? What would happen if the curse truly manifested? However, the thought of Lila trapped in limbo motivated me to push forward. When Jake recited the final phrase, a deep silence enveloped the clearing. The wind stopped, and the candle flames steadied into a constant light. I looked around, expecting to see something, anything, but everything was in a haunting calm. Then suddenly, the candles began to flicker, and a cold breeze blew again. "Chloe," Jake whispered, his gaze fixed on a point behind me. I turned slowly, and the sight that greeted me made my heart race. The doll was there, at the edge of the circle, looking more alive than ever. Its porcelain eyes shone brightly, and tears of blood streamed down its cheeks, forming small puddles on the ground. "No," I murmured, feeling a wave of terror wash over me. "This can't be happening. It's her!" Jake shouted, grabbing my hand. "The connection is strong. We need to talk to her." The doll stood still, as if waiting. I could feel her pain and desperation. It was like we were at an impasse. I wanted to understand, but fear paralyzed me. "Lila?" Jake called, his voice trembling. "Are you here?" The tears of blood flowed faster, and suddenly, a soft voice, filled with pain, echoed in my mind. "Chloe, help me, what do you want?" I asked, fighting the urge to run. "I'm trapped." Lila's voice grew stronger, almost like a lament. "The pact, the curse, it needs to be broken. What do we need to do?" Jake asked, looking at me and then at the doll. The doll began to twist, and I felt an impulse to approach. There was something in her gaze that drew me in, a deep sadness I couldn't ignore. As I got closer, the tears of blood ceased to flow, and a sense of calm enveloped the environment. "You need to understand," Lila's voice echoed again, now clearer. "The curse isn't just about me. It's linked to your family, to the fear they've always carried." "Fear?" I asked, confused. "Fear of what?" "Fear of facing the past. Fear of being free." The doll twisted once more, as if struggling against invisible chains. "You need to decide if you will continue, or if you will fight." I looked at Jake, who was as absorbed in the conversation as I was. What Lila was asking us was more than just freeing her, it was a call to confront our own fears. The connection I felt with Lila was stronger than I could have imagined, and I knew I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for my entire family. "We're here to help you, Lila. We will free you," Jake said firmly. The doll blinked, and a faint smile appeared on her face. I knew we were about to venture down a dangerous path, but the determination in my heart outweighed the fear. It was time to face the truth, not just about Lila, but about ourselves. The air in the forest was heavy, as if the very environment was holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to happen. Jake and I positioned ourselves in a circle that had been outlined with salt, an ancient protection we found in the book. My fingers trembled as I held the doll, now cold and heavy in my hands. The blood tears streaming from her eyes reminded me of the pain Lila had carried, and I knew that the only way to free her, and myself, was to confront what was about to happen. "What if you feel like you can't go on?" Jake asked, his voice a nervous whisper that mingled with the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. He was worried, and I could see it in his eyes. "What if the doll, if she transforms into something we can't control?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice nearly faltering. "But I can't stop now. My mom, she can't go on like this. And Lila, she deserves peace." I looked at the doll, which seemed to watch me with a deep, melancholic gaze. "We will uncover the truth." Jake nodded, his determination reflecting mine. Hashtag. He stepped back a bit and began to arrange the elements we had collected, a black candle, a small mirror, and some dirt we took from the spot where Lila had disappeared. The atmosphere was thick with expectation and, at the same time, fear. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. Lila's story seemed to fish the shadows of the forest, shrouded in mystery, and I was about to dive in headfirst. "It's all set," Jake said, his voice now firmer. He looked at me, and there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Let's do this." I took a deep breath and placed the doll in the center of the circle. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced around us. Lila, I began, my voice faltering, we're here to free you. You don't have to suffer anymore. We want to understand your story. The moment I finished speaking, I felt a chill run down my spine. The wind seemed to pick up, and the doll began to vibrate slightly. The smile on its porcelain face appeared to contort, and tears of blood started to flow more intensely. Jake! Look! I shouted, my heart racing in my chest. He leaned forward, and I saw his look of horror transform into a mix of astonishment and concern. This isn't right, Chloe. What's happening? He stepped back a bit, as if the doll might attack him, and I couldn't blame him for that. The air was growing dense, and I could feel the pressure in my chest increasing. We need to continue, I said, trying to keep calm. We can't give up now. He hesitated, but finally nodded. Together, we began to recite the words of the ritual we had found in the book. With each syllable that left our lips, the temperature around us seemed to change, as if the forest itself were listening. Lila, if you're here, show yourself. I implored, my voice echoing in the darkness. Suddenly, a vision began to form before me. A thick mist spread, and in the midst of it, I saw the silhouette of a girl. Her eyes were large and sad, and the dress she wore seemed to float as if it were underwater. It was Lila. Chloe, her voice was a whisper, almost inaudible, but I heard it clearly. Did you come to find me? Yes. I cried, feeling emotion take over me. We're here to free you. We want to know what happened to you. She hesitated, looking at the doll still in front of us. She is part of me. Part of my pain. The pact my family made, it still lives on. And now, your family is also tied to it. The atmosphere became increasingly heavy, and I could feel the pressure on my shoulders mounting. The doll began to twist, and the tears of blood transformed into a steady stream. No, no! Jake exclaimed, backing away once again. Chloe, we need to stop. This isn't right. I can't stop, I replied, determination replacing the fear in my heart. If this is what we need to do to free Lila and my mom, then I will continue. I looked at Lila, who seemed increasingly distressed. Please, Lila, tell us what we need to do. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the doll let out a shrill scream that echoed through the forest. The sound was so piercing it felt like it sliced through the air. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and Jake shouted, Chloe, we need to get out of here. But I couldn't move. Lila's vision was becoming more intense, and I felt her pain as if it were my own. The pact, it's not just about protection. It's about the fear you've always carried, Lila said, her voice now stronger. You must face that fear to break the curse. How? I asked desperately. How can we do that? Free yourself from the past, she replied, and the doll began to twist even more. Face what's inside you. The fear you have of losing everything. Only then will the curse be broken. The tears of blood began to flow even faster, and I knew I was about to lose control. The ritual we had started now seemed to be attracting spirits from all around, and the energy around us was almost palpable. Jake, this is attracting more spirits. We need to decide whether to continue or stop. I shouted, struggling against the pressure that was increasing by the second. Chloe, I don't know if we can do this. It's becoming dangerous. He looked pale, and I could see the fear in his eyes. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't turn back. If I don't continue, my mom will be trapped in an eternal nightmare. Lila deserves freedom. I felt I had a choice to make, and the weight of that decision was crushing. I looked at the doll, which seemed to be in agony, and turned my attention back to Lila. Are you ready for this? Lila nodded, but there was sadness in her eyes. Freedom comes at a cost, Chloe. You must be willing to sacrifice your own happiness. I declared, feeling a surge of courage. I will face my fears. I will free you, Lila, no matter what it costs. Then continue, Lila whispered. And never forget, the past cannot be changed, but you can choose how it affects your future. I felt a fire burning in my chest, and with that, I began to recite the final words of the ritual, my voice rising above the chaos around us. The wind howled, and the doll began to glow, an intense light emanating from it, while the spirits seemed to dance around us, drawn by the energy. Free yourself. We break the pact. Free Lila, and free your family. I shouted, my voice echoing through the forest. The light intensified, and I felt the connection with Lila strengthen. Whatever was about to happen had to be faced. And so, amidst the chaos and pain, I made a decision that would change everything. The cold of the night enveloped the forest like a heavy cloak, and I could feel the tension in the air as I prepared for the ritual. Jake and I were surrounded by towering trees, their branches resembling dark claws reaching for the sky, as if trying to capture the full moon that timidly shone between the clouds. The silence was profound, but I could hear my heart racing in my chest, each beat echoing in my mind like a warning that we were about to cross a line that couldn't be undone. Are you ready to do this? Jake asked, his voice low and tense. He was looking at me, his eyes reflecting the moonlight, and I could see the worry mixed with determination in his gaze. The atmosphere around us seemed to pulse with energy, and I knew that what we were about to do was more than just a ritual, it was a desperate attempt to free not only Lila but also my family from a past that imprisoned them. I don't know if I'm ready, but I can't give up now, I replied, trying to infuse my voice with conviction, even though uncertainty consumed me. My mom, she needs me. And Lila, she deserves peace. Jake nodded, a gesture that gave me a little courage. He approached the table we had set up with the items we found in the book. Each object held significance, a connection to Lila's story and the dark pact surrounding my family. I lit the candles, one by one, and the flickering light illuminated our faces with a soft glow, creating dancing shadows around us. Let's begin, he said, picking up the ancient book and opening it to the page detailing the ritual. Remember, Chloe, we need to focus. What we're doing here is powerful, and the doll, she won't like this. I felt a chill run down my spine at the mention of the doll. It was in a box nearby, watching us with its porcelain eyes, as if aware of every move we made. A wave of fear hit me, but I knew I couldn't hesitate. Lila's fate and my mother's sanity were at stake. Jake started to recite the words of the ritual, his voice firm, but there was an underlying tremor that betrayed his anxiety. I followed him, trying to concentrate on the words echoing in the darkness around us. As we spoke, I felt a growing pressure in the air, as if the forest itself were watching, awaiting what would come next. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept past us, and the candles flickered, nearly extinguishing. I looked at the doll, and what I saw froze me in place. It was contorting, as if it were alive, and tears of blood began to flow from its glassy eyes. My stomach churned. Jake! I screamed, horrified. Look! Keep going. Don't stop, he commanded, his voice now more intense, but I could see the fear in his eyes. It's the doll's reaction. We need to push through. I hesitated, my heart caught between the urge to flee and the need to help. What was happening was beyond my comprehension. It felt as if Lila's very spirit was manifesting, struggling against what we were trying to do. Chloe, we need to continue. Jake insisted, and his words snapped me back to reality. I took a deep breath, holding it for a moment, and refocused on the words of the ritual. I can't let this stop me, I thought. Lila needs me. The doll's eyes were locked onto mine, and the connection I felt was intense. A mix of fear and compassion washed over me. Lila's voice echoed in my mind, fragments of her story intertwining with my own pain. Help me, Chloe, free me, a soft voice whispered, almost like a distant echo, but I knew it was real. Who are you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me? I am Lila, the voice replied, now clearer. I have been trapped for so long. Your grandmother's pact, it imprisoned me here. I don't know freedom. I need you. But, how can I help? The sensation of being drawn into a reality I couldn't comprehend made me dizzy. I'm scared. What will happen to my family if I do this? You must confront the past. The curse your family carries is not just mine. It belongs to all of us. Fear is the true prison. Lila's voice was laden with sadness and a strength that challenged me to carry on. I felt a wave of compassion for that girl who never had the chance to live. The fear that paralyzed me began to dissipate, replaced by fierce determination, and I realized I couldn't allow the past to continue haunting our lives. I will do this, I declared, my voice stronger now. I will free her. With renewed vigor, I focused again on the ritual. Jake continued to recite the words, and the doll began to contort even more, the tears of blood now streaming like a constant flow. The environment around us seemed to vibrate with energy, and I realized we were at a point of no return. Shadows in the forest stirred, as if preparing for a cataclysmic event. Chloe, don't look at the doll. Stay focused. Jake shouted, but I couldn't look away. The doll seemed to be transforming, its features distorting into a mask of pain and suffering. Lila. I cried. I'm here. I will help you. You must free yourself from the fear your family carries, Lila whispered again, and the connection between us intensified. Your past is not your future. Face it and free me. You are stronger than you think. I felt a wave of warmth wash over me. It was as if I was being filled with energy that wasn't mine but belonged to Lila. The fear that had paralyzed me transformed into powerful strength. I was determined to break this curse, not just for Lila, but for myself and my mother. Jake, keep going. We're so close. I shouted, and he intensified his voice, reciting the words of the ritual with renewed fervor. The air around us began to vibrate, and the doll emitted a high-pitched scream, as if Lila's very essence was being torn from her body. Chloe. Jake called, his voice now barely audible amidst the chaos. Focus. You need to connect with her spirit. I'm trying. I screamed back. Lila, I'm here. I won't leave you alone. The doll's tears of blood began to evaporate, and I saw visions of Lila dancing in my mind. A girl with curly hair and bright eyes, full of life and laughter, but soon transforming into images of despair and sadness. The truth about her disappearance began to unravel before me like a movie. I saw flashes of a dark past, a pact made in desperation, a life interrupted by fears and secrets. Don't let the darkness consume you, Chloe. Lila's voice echoed in my mind. Break the cycle, or you will become a part of it. Then, in a moment of clarity, I understood what I needed to do. I am not my family's fear. I am more than that. I am Chloe. I shouted, and with each word I spoke, I felt the weight of the curse starting to lift. The doll stopped contorting, and its eyes, once filled with suffering, began to glow softly. Thank you, Lila whispered, and for a brief moment, I saw her true self reflected in the doll's eyes. You are the key to freedom. By freeing me, you also free yourself. With one final effort, I gathered all my strength and spoke the final words of the ritual. The air grew heavy, but I felt we were on the verge of something extraordinary. The light surrounding us intensified, and the doll's scream transformed into a wail of liberation. I am no longer a fear, I am free. Lila's voice echoed, and with that, a wave of energy swept through the forest. The ground trembled. The air was thick, and I felt each breath was a struggle. The ritual had reached its climax, and the energies around us pulsed like a frantic drum. The doll, with its deep eyes and tears of blood running down its porcelain cheeks, seemed alive, a presence that threatened to engulf us. I knew the decisive moment had come. "Chloe, you need to decide now," Jake shouted, his eyes wide with fear and determination. He stood beside me, his hand gripping mine as if he could give me the courage I desperately needed. But the truth was, I was paralyzed. The vision of my mother, half fainted and trapped in a nightmare, echoed in my mind. I couldn't leave her like that. "If we don't do this, she might never come back to normal," I murmured, my voice faltering. The idea of sacrificing my happiness to save my mother and free Lila weighed heavily on my shoulders. But at the same time, a part of me knew that the true curse was not just about Lila or the doll, it was rooted in our family, in our fears and secrets. Jake looked at me, his eyes filled with understanding. "If you feel this is the right thing to do, then I'm with you. Together, we can do this." His trust gave me a bit of strength, but the doubt still lingered. I hesitated, looking at the doll, which seemed to pulse with its own energy, as if it was waiting for me. "I won't let you control me," I declared, feeling adrenaline coursing through my veins. "You are not just a doll. You are part of our past." I stepped closer, aware that what I was about to do could change everything. "I need to understand," I whispered, gently touching the doll. The cold sensation of the porcelain penetrated me, and in an instant, a wave of visions flooded my mind. The image of Lila, a girl with golden hair and bright eyes, appeared before me. She was in a field of flowers, laughing, but soon the scene changed. I saw shadowy faces, distorted laughter, and then the pain. Lila was trapped in a dark place, a place that felt familiar, as if it were part of me. You have to free my soul," Lila's voice echoed in my mind, soft but filled with sorrow. "I can't escape. Your grandmother's pact keeps me here, and the curse drags on for generations." I couldn't believe that innocent child had been trapped for so many years, and now my own family was part of this suffering. "I will do this for you, Lila," I declared, determination swelling in my chest. "But you need to help me." "What do I do?" The doll twisted under my hand, and the tears of blood intensified, as if reacting to my intention. "You must confront the fear your family hides. ###, the true curse isn't mine, but theirs. The fear of losing, the fear of forgetting." Lila's voice grew more intense, and I realized that the connection between us was deeper than I could have ever imagined. "But how can I face this? What should I do?" I asked, anxiety consuming me. What did this really mean? How could I confront my family's past, something that felt so far away, yet now seemed so close? Face them. Confronting them is the first step. Free yourself from the chains that bind you. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something is more important than fear. Lila's words echoed in my mind like a mantra, and I knew I was getting closer to the truth. "I don't know if I can." I started, but Jake held my hand tighter, pulling me back to reality. "You can, Chloe. Remember what you've already faced. You're not alone." The weight of his words enveloped me, and I realized that even if fear still lingered, I had to fight against it. "You're right," I declared, my voice growing stronger. "I will face this. I will free you, Lila." With that thought, I focused, visualizing the pain and fears that my family carried. The pressure around us intensified, and I could feel the shadows drawing closer, attracted by the energy of the ritual. The visions began to sharpen, and I saw the image of my grandmother, a woman haunted by her choices, and my mother's pain, trapped in a cycle of nightmares. The terror that surrounded us was palpable, a thick fog that muffled the light. "I won't let this continue," I declared, determination rising within me. "I will break this cycle." "Do it, Chloe!" Jake shouted, his voice echoing amid the chaos. And in a moment of clarity, I yelled, "I release Lila. I break the pact that holds my family's pain." The words came out with a strength I didn't know I possessed. At that instant, a wave of energy surged through the space around us. The doll began to glow brightly, and the tears of blood transformed into tears of light. A piercing scream echoed, and I knew it was Lila freeing herself from her chains. "Thank you, Chloe," her voice resonated, filled with gratitude and love. I felt the connection between us strengthen, as if an invisible thread tied us together. "You are braver than you realize. Now, I can finally rest." The energy around us began to change, and the shadows that had once surrounded us started to dissipate. I looked at Jake, who also appeared relieved, and together we felt the weight lift from our shoulders. "We did it," he whispered, and I knew he was right. The glow around us began to fade, and I saw the doll, now calm, resting in my hands. The tears had disappeared, and instead, a serene smile adorned her porcelain face. I knew the true curse had been broken, not just Lila's, but my family's as well. When I opened my eyes, I found myself at home, sunlight streaming through the window and illuminating the room. My mother was there, sitting on the bed with a peaceful expression on her face. She looked restored, as if the nightmares that had tormented her had finally vanished. I watched her, a mix of relief and happiness flooding my heart. "Mom," I called, approaching cautiously. She turned her head and smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. "Chloe, dear," she said, her voice soft and full of love. "Are you okay?" "I am, and you are too." I hugged her tightly, feeling that everything that had happened had united us in a new and powerful way. "I did it, Mom. I freed Lila." She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and love. "Lila? The doll, you broke the curse." "Yes, and now we are free. Free from fear, from pain." I glanced around, and the doll was resting in a corner, tear-free but wearing that serene smile. "She is at peace now." My mother took a deep breath, as if releasing a weight she had carried for years. "I feel like something has changed. I feel like I can finally breathe again." And in that moment, I realized that the true curse wasn't just about the doll or Lila, it was about the fear that held us captive, the pain that silenced us. But now, all of that had changed. We were free. As I looked at the doll, a sense of peace enveloped me. The connection to the past had been restored, not as a burden, but as a lesson of love and courage. The doll, now harmless, lay there, a symbol of the peace that had finally come to our family. "Let's take care of her," I said to my mother, a new purpose rising within me. "She deserves a home where she can be appreciated, not feared." "Yes, dear," my mother agreed, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Let's do this together." And so, the story of Lila and the porcelain doll became a part of us, no longer a curse, but a reminder of the power of courage and love that can break any cycle of pain. Instead of fearing her, we would now honor her, just as we would honor the truth.